Welcome to Hammer Down. My name is Mike Bush. I'm the Chief Growth Officer over at CDL 1000. And this is a podcast aimed at supply chain professionals. I'm delighted today to be joined by Justin Martin, who oversees social media for the FreightWaves team and spent 15 years also as a driver. Justin, what's up, brother?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I appreciate you joining me, man. So walk me a little bit through your journey, Justin. I'm a little confused as to how you went from I'm a truck driver with a sense of humor to I'm running all of social media for a publication and data player like FreightWaves.
Me too. Yeah, so back in 2007, I was just working retail in South Florida. I was working at Publix, actually, of all places. And I had a friend who promised me a job up in New York, of all places. And turns out he was lying the whole time. But I had already quit my job and packed my bags and everything, and I had nowhere to go. So I reached out to my dad, and I was like, "What do you recommend?" Because I got nothing. I didn't go to college. I had no degree, no nothing. I basically just had a high school diploma and a driver's license. And he and my mom, a few years prior, were driving team for Schneider for about a year. And he was like, "Well, why don't you try truck driving?" So I was like, "Okay," and kind of worked my way through that. Was with them for a year and a half, paid off my CDL school debt, and then went back to Florida. And it was like right in the middle of the Great Recession. Like nobody was hiring. I found a guy on Craigslist. I drove truck for him for a few months. He owned one truck. I drove the other, and tried to get paid. I went from basically like a big mega carrier to like a small owner operator. So going from one extreme to the other, and trying to get paid by him was like pulling teeth. And then I was working at Target of all places. They told me like when I was interviewing, they're like, you can either work. They use different terms for everything. It was called dry flow. They're like, you can either work dry flow or you work freezer. Because if you work at freezer, you won't get laid off after the holidays are over. So I said, okay, I'll do that. Did that for a few months, and then this dream job just like fell into my lap. I went to high school with this guy, Ryan. His dad was driving for a company hauling military freight, and he needed a new co-driver. The guy he was driving with wanted to split up and drive with his wife, so his dad needed a new co-driver. And we met at a bar in Palm Beach, Florida. Had a couple beers. He told me about the job, and I said, "This sounds way too good to be true. I'm not qualified for any of this stuff." And he's like, "No, it's fine. It's fine. You just fill out the application, pass the security clearance, and you're good to go." And yeah, I did that for 4 years, and that was, as far as driving, that was about as good as it gets as far as a driving job. No touch freight. You don't even look at the trucks while they're loading and unloading you. I drove with him for 2 years, and then I brought my dad on with me because he was looking to get back into driving again. And then after a few years of that, it was kind of like getting towards the end of my like OTR career. I was like, okay, it's time to settle down, put down some roots. And I had some friends in Philadelphia that offered me a room up there. So I moved to Philly this was 2014 now. And I bounced around from a couple of driving jobs in Philadelphia. And then I was working as a mail contractor for the Postal Service. And I did that for 3 years. And then I kept applying at the post office to try and work there, and finally got approved. And so my last driving career was with the Postal Service. I was there for 5 years. I was pretty much set for life. I mean, I had benefits, retirement, everything all paid off or paid, potentially in the future. And then at work one day, I saw a tweet by Dooner, who was from FreightWaves, and he was like, "Hey, are you a truck driver? Are you good with social media? And can you edit videos?" And I was like, "That kind of sounds like me." So I just applied on a whim, and he's like, "You're perfect. You're hired. Come work for us." And so yeah, I've been at FreightWaves since April 2021 now.
One of the reasons I was thrilled to have you as a guest on the show is that you had attended a cryptocurrency event recently, and I saw you and a bunch of the fellows from Freight Twitter or Freight X all seem to be on site. Where does crypto fit into the world of trucking here?
So that was like such a fish out of water experience for me because like I've been following Bitcoin for a while. I know like just enough about crypto to kind of like have surface level conversations. But that was the first time I ever went to a space where I'm like, oh, everybody here is like really young, really driven. They have all these ideas, but like not a lot of like concrete on the ground kind of stuff. A lot of it was like just super ethereal, like kind of like art projects, so to speak. I was there to host a panel with these guys from a company called Truck Coin Swap, and what they're basically trying to do is um, make factoring cheaper and more streamlined for carriers. So, like if you broker a load for somebody and you need to get paid, your options are either wait 30 days to get the full money, or use quick pay or some kind of factoring company, and then they take based on what your credit is, anywhere from 3 to 5% off the gross. And if you're doing that with every load for like a year, that's like 35% of your income at the end of the year. So when we went in there, it was kind of cool because like all these people were telling us like these projects that we're doing, and when they ask us what we're there to represent, we tell them about supply chain stuff, and they're like, "Oh my god, like we never even like considered the possibilities of connecting all this stuff together." So yeah, there's tons and tons and tons of like untapped potential in this space right now.
Okay, gotcha. So I'm gonna divide blockchain and crypto in this discussion, right? Because blockchain
Hmm.
was the technology backend that we've tried a couple of times. It seems like it would make sense because you have so many disparate organizations touching freight. But
Hmm.
ultimately, because standardization is really hard, even Maersk wasn't able to drive trade lens adoption the way I think that they wanted to. So we've sort of seen blockchain as an industry fallout here. But your point about crypto as a way to both engage and possibly overcome some of the factoring issues is really easy or really interesting. What would you say are kind of the big barriers to adoption for crypto becoming even more important within the supply chain space or within the transportation space?
Mostly just ease of use and like being able to tell people how it works, because a lot of it is like, well, you got to set up a wallet account and use 5 different websites, this and that. Like you said, there's no standardization right now. Even the term, the blockchain ledger, different companies have their own different things. Like there was one called a hyperledger. There was a guy from FedEx is actually like really big into this space right now. They're trying all kinds of different things. Mastercard, I know they have their own thing. So there are big companies with big war chests right now dipping their toes in to see what they can do.
Okay, so why would a company like Mastercard be looking one at logistics, but two also at like alternate forms of payment? What do you think is the speculation there?
Volume, because if you have lots of carriers and lots of brokers using you for their factoring, and you're taking 1% off of every one of those transactions, that's a lot of transactions right there.
Got it. Okay, cool. So are you a crypto believer? Do you think crypto is here to stay, or is this just a fad like Beanie Babies, where a bunch of guys with neckbeards trained a computer to play Sudoku in order to trade Monopoly money for prostitutes, cocaine, and cartoon apes?
That Yeah, it's tough because I'm 40. I just turned 40 in August, and I feel like a 40-year-old in the year like 1992, like when the internet first came around. It was so new and so like untapped that like most people that were 40 at the time were like, "Oh, this is a fad. We got fax machines, everything's working fine." And then boom, you got Amazon. Just a few years later, just booting up. A lot of the young people that we were talking to, it kind of felt like all this stuff that they're embedded in right now is just going to be, they're like, you're not even going to talk about it in a few years. Like blockchain, ledgers, all that stuff. It's going to be so behind the scenes running everything that it's just like nobody uses HTTPS whatever to like spell out a website anymore. Now it's just yahoo.com or bing.com or whatever. So it's like all these fundamental background things that are like moving everything behind the scenes that like as long as it works, nobody really talks about it.
Okay. Is it fair to say you're seeing a parallel between like blockchain slash crypto and maybe RSS, the super simple syndication solution
Yeah.
that's kind of the plumbing of the
Yep.
internet now. So you're seeing
Yeah. Yeah.
potentially like cryptocurrency is the plumbing of our infrastructure. I love that. I love that approach.
Yeah, yeah, and just like how in the beginning there was all these different protocols and stuff that like popped up and fizzled out. You're going to see that with crypto too. I think right now you're going to see 1,000 flowers bloom, maybe 99% of them die off, and then the few that stick around are the ones that are going to reap the benefits of just doing a better job of making things easier for people.
Gotcha. One question I try to ask guests is, if I were to give you a magic wand to solve one problem in supply chain, what's the issue you would tackle?
Oh man, subsidies. Subsidies for large carriers right now. That is like my, if I had a flaming sword and I could just like slash, all the dead wood off of the supply chain right now, that would be number one. This whole push of like driver shortage narratives and all that. That was, 16 years ago when I went to truck driving school. That was the case back then. But I kind of understood it as well. So I'll give you an example. Like when I went to truck driving school, there were, I've told this story many times. There were 76 of us in the class, and over 2 weeks, only 16 of us passed and got our CDLs. Just in the first 2 days, like half the people quit. And then after the 2 weeks, you go home for a few days, you get a rest, then you go back on the road with a training engineer for another 2 weeks. Within a year, I was the only person still in the trucking industry. Not that like had quit and gone to work for someone else. Everybody else just straight up quit trucking. And that was, back in 2007. And it's still the case today. Much of what's happening in trucking right now is a turnover issue, not a shortage. And I think once companies realize that they can no longer rely on a never ending supply of like fresh meat coming in, they need to like really hunker down and do some soul searching and think, okay, what is it that we're doing that's like chasing people out the door? And that would solve so many problems, I believe.
Okay. So, Justin, I have this working theory that most of the people that work in supply chain have gotten it in two ways. They either say, one, I fell into it, or two, I'm a family legacy. And I'm willing to bet that 80 to 90% of folks in the industry fall into one of those two buckets. It's great. It's a great way to attract people, but it also leads to a lot of inertia, right? Like it's the same way we've always done things because that's the way we all learned. If you were talking, let's say at like University of Southern California, and giving a speech to a room full of potential supply chain practitioners, what advice would you give a bunch of kids that are thinking about entering the industry?
That's a tough one because it's such a big open. So a good friend of ours, Blythe, she runs a podcast called Everything is Logistics, and that really is kind of it's a great title because literally everything is logistics. I talk to a lot of like software guys, and I tell them like stop going into like the Bitcoin, cyber, crypto spaces looking to like sell JPEGs under the table. Look, try to go for guys that are like literally moving the world. Like you could be writing software right now that could absolutely change how truck drivers are interacting with brokers, on a daily basis. Also, if you want to get into trucking, you don't really even need a degree for that. But definitely, if you're going to go into the supply chain space, talk to guys on the ground because it's really you could come up with the greatest piece of software ever, but unless you're able to like put it in language that the people that are going to be using it understand, it's a really hard sell.
Got it. So starting out as a non-tech guy or starting out as a tech guy or tech girl coming into the industry without a whole lot of knowledge, maybe that $100 million round of funding and multi-billion-dollar valuation isn't such a good thing right off the bat.
Yeah. And what's cool too about, trucking and supply chain and stuff is just about like whenever I talk to people I've never met and I mentioned that I'm a truck driver, they almost always say, oh, my dad was a truck driver or my uncle's a truck driver or everybody knows somebody who's a truck driver. So if you have an idea or something that you want to pitch to them, it's not that hard to like find somebody and say, hey, what do you think about this? And you tell them your plan and then be prepared to be crushed.
Totally true. And I've never met a driver who was subtle about his feelings or unwilling to share the way he really felt, which is pretty great.